Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Lisa Sawsville, and I'm with Vermont Coverts Woodlands for Wildlife, and we're happy to host this presentation tonight on emerald ash borers and its relation to the land and landowners and how we're going to address this situation here. This is being sponsored by the Northfield Conservation Commission. I worked with Russ Barrett and Ruth Rutenberg and a few others to pull this together, and I want to thank them for partnering with Coverts and allowing us to help you bring this, turns out to be statewide, and so well beyond the influence of just your small conservation commission. So this is fabulous. Thank you. The way things will work tonight, we have a group of presenters that Russ will actually introduce, and we're going to hold questions till the end. If you would type your questions in the chat box, I'll be monitoring the chat box, and then we'll ask those questions a little bit between presenters if we have a chance, or at the end. I would like to point out, if you enjoy these kinds of programs and you're not already on Vermont Coverts e-news list, you can sign up for our e-news on our website. And it's just real easy. And then you'll get monthly, sometimes every 2 weeks, an e-news with upcoming programs relating to forestry and wildlife that are occurring in the state. So we hope you'll have a chance to do that. With that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Russ and let you welcome everybody as well, Russ, and introduce the speakers. Bear with us if we have some technical difficulties tonight. This is Zoom. I know many of you have been on Zoom programs, so you're used to sometimes allowing us to troubleshoot. So we thank you for that. Russ, take her away.
Welcome, everybody, especially Jim White down in Bennington County. I saw his pretty face on there. I'm a member of the Northfield Conservation Commission, also tree warden for Northfield. The forum tonight is part of a grant we received from Forest and Parks Urban and Community Forestry Program to raise the awareness of raise the public awareness on emerald ash borer, in part to fund some tree removal within town, and to host 2 forums, of which this is the second one tonight. I'd like to thank from the Conservation Commission Debbie Zawaro and Ruth Rutenberg, who actually wrote the grant that was awarded by Forest and Parks. And I'd like to thank Lisa Sawsville and Coverts for hosting the virtual site tonight and helping with the help publicize the meetings tonight. Quickly, tonight's speakers, first off, will be Chris Olson, who's county forester in Addison County. He'll go over some general recommendations for woodlot owners, maybe give some reminders to people who are in the use value appraisal program, and go over some resources for either new woodlot owners or woodlot owners who are not eligible for the or in the current use program. Second speaker will be Paul Frederick. He's a wood utilization and wood energy program manager. He'll talk a little about general markets for ash, maybe a little bit about the history of ash markets in the Midwest. They've had this problem for a number of years, and go over some quarantine issues, whether in fact that may still be an issue or not at this point. Third speaker will be Rose Beatty. She's a consulting forester here in Northfield. She'll give a quick explanation on services that consulting foresters generally provide. Maybe a little bit about what kind of advice she's giving her clients, and go over some of the timber harvesting options that would be available to landowners. Just a quick reminder for people who are in the woods this winter, whether you're skiing, snowshoeing, or generally working in a woodlot, things to keep an eye out for the emerald ash borer. First would be recent woodpecker activities. It's a good time to see that. You can see it at the top of the trees, and you should be able to pick that up if it's happening. Second would be insect galleries. If you've got bark peeling off on any of the ash trees, just check them out. See if they've got some galleries going on inside there. Sprouting branches, you can see this time pretty good this time of year. Also D-shaped exit holes in the bark. Dieback in the foliage, we'll have to wait till spring leaf out to notice that kind of stuff. So with that, Chris, maybe you could go ahead and give the county forester's point of view on this.
Sure, I'll see if I can start my presentation here. So can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
And can you see my slide?
I can't.
Not yet.
I see an owl.
That's Lisa's slide.
Chris, your voice is kind of faint on my end.
Okay, I'll see if I can turn some of this stuff up. Sorry about that. Okay, so can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
And can you see the slide?
Nope.
Okay, can you see me?
Nope.
No.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
It's all right. We're all patient.
So why can't you?
Chris,
see-
I can see you. So maybe that's on another screen those guys aren't catching.
There are 3 screens of viewers.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and just start talking if that's okay.
Yep, now I can see you. Your screen popped back on. You want to try sharing one more time? So down to the green share screen
Yeah,
and then pick the screen that you want to share.
the green share screen, so I don't
That's-
see.
It's at the bottom, if you hover your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom.
The host has actually disabled it.
Not for Chris, thank you.
So,
Just like where we practiced before.
So what we just, oh God, I don't know how to.
Well, you just listen to him.
have any green button, Lisa?
So if you hover your mouse over the very bottom, it shows mute, it shows start video. At the bottom of the Zoom screen. Do you see those, Chris?
No,
What are you seeing?
I see, well, let me go back.
Sorry, all, we practiced.
Sorry about that. Okay. And so share screen. You there now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that all.
Okay, now you need to get into presentation mode.
Which is,
The sign thing at the bottom.
does that look right?
Perfect. Yep. Thanks all for being patient.
No, sorry about that.
Hey,
And so I'm just going to give a quick overview, go through these pretty quickly. So the EAB was first detected in 2002 in Detroit. It moves 1 to 2 miles a year on its own, but it goes down the highway 55 miles an hour in various conditions. All ashes are affected. The impacts are gradual to the tree. And so there's that top picture shows flecking from woodpecker damage. The middle picture shows trees starting to die back. And then after 8 to 9 years, some trees will be completely dead. This is a picture in, I think it was in Michigan, or no, Toledo, Ohio. Pretty dramatic change to street trees there. These are some detection efforts, the purple traps people I think are familiar with. This is a picture that shows known infestations now, and I'm not sure if it's totally up to date. There seems to be more. Firewood's big way that it moves. This is a piece of fire with larval tracks. You can see those circuitous tracks in it. In Vermont, there's been changes to the way the states responded to it. Now that it's known to be in many different counties, they've joined, excuse me, the ranks of other states who are, you know, acknowledging that they have it basically, but there's still hope to slow the spread by following these sort of guidelines. That is, knowing something about the insect itself, knowing how you can transfer it from one location to another. And so there's, you know, guidelines for homeowners, basically just about not moving wood to your camp. My father moved wood from his house to his camp, and I happened to be there when he was arriving, and I was like, Dad, and he was a master community forester, master community gardener, and so I know that there's a temptation to always move wood. There's really good—
Chris, could you talk a little louder?
Yep, sorry. There's really good information available. VT invasives, Vermont community, community.org, and then of course Coverts has a bunch of different information posted on their webpage where you can find this information. That's a picture of the adult insect. The image of it on the penny gives you a dumb idea for its size. So it's not a very big insect, but it is pretty hungry. This is an image of the life cycle. So the adult flies, lands on a tree, lays an egg in the bark. The egg hatches, just like any insect life cycle. The egg hatches. The larval, which you can see there in the wood, feeds between the bark and the wood, cutting off the transport of nutrients and water. And so this image on the bottom, you can see of an individual tree that has been infected. And so how the infection rate is shown by symptoms in the tree. So, and this is a little bit old, I think. But so, whoopsie, I'll go back one. So at some point, there'll be very high ash mortality, essentially. And this has been proven in other states where it's been there longer. And so we're in this early stage. At some point, it'll be very present across the state, and you'll have a fair amount of mortality. These are signs of it. Basically, you're cutting off the circulation of the tree, transporting water up into the branches and transporting nutrients down. Basically, the circulatory system of the tree is severed by the insects feeding. These are signs. The epicormic branching on the stems and up high is a typical sign of a tree under stress. These are bark cracks, which are also been sign of EAB infestation. And this is woodpecker flecking. And so oftentimes the damage won't be visible 6 feet, 5 feet above the ground. It'll be up high in the trees. And so if you're looking for it in your forest land, don't focus just on what you can see when you look over the top of your glasses or something. Look up, you know, into the tops of the trees, bring binoculars and that sort of thing. And again, the evidence that blonding of the bark of the ash is caused by woodpeckers and other birds who are busy up there because they can hear the larval feeding. This is an image of the D-shaped exit hole with the one on the left. You can see the emerald ash borer head sticking out of the thing. And of course, the D-shaped exit holes, the insects don't know anything about the alphabet, and they might make exit holes that aren't quite D-shaped. The circuitous tracks of the larva are shown there on the left and in the other image. And again, that's typical of their movement, not necessarily guaranteed. And there's other bark beetles that cause similar signs of, from their gallery tracks. And so this is a VT Invasives is an organization where if you find stuff, you can report it. And you can also call your county forester or your consulting forester or one of the fine organizations that you're a part of to get, more assistance or to get confirmation. But this will be, VT Invasives has this set up so that you'll provide information that's necessary for the people who will follow up. So this specific PowerPoint that I'm showing you, it was developed for municipalities primarily. I know there's others watching this show who are landowners, but so some of these slides will be for forest landowners and some will be for municipalities or conservation commissions. And so the first thing you need to know if you own forest land is, do you have vulnerability? And so what is the stocking in your forest? Is there ash present? And if so, then often the question we get is, should you cut your ash? Or should I cut my ash? And that I always respond like I've been taught by previous county foresters when I was a consulting forester, to reply to questions like that with the answer, it depends, which is a classic sort of answer for a forester, because you can answer almost every question that you're asked with that first reply. But so if you have difficult access, then you might want to start planning now. If you have easy access to some of your forest land or the forest land where you have ash, then you might be able to hold those cards a little bit longer. And so it will depend on the specific situation. And again, as I said, you got to know where it is and how you can get to it and what would happen if you chose not to get to it. You can identify them on the ground and keep track of their condition by taking photographs and that sort of thing. So you can watch the tops a little closer as the foliage comes out in the spring. And so when a tree is infested, it's been shown in other states and here in Vermont that in a period of 3 to 5 years, many of the trees will die. There are lingering ash that do appear. And if they're around a house or an outbuilding, then they become dangerous. Ash, as you know, is fairly brittle wood. The old expression, ash would wet and ash would dry, a king would warm his slippers by, speaks, I believe, somehow to the fact that you can burn ash when it's still green and you get pretty good BTUs out of it, but also it splits easily. And I think that those two things go together. And so the splitting easily also means that it breaks easy. And so you have to be really careful if you have trees around your property that might be high risk trees close to a building or something that you care about. And so the things to think about are if you're own forest land that's enrolled in the current use program, is there going to be a loss of timber value? What sort of safety hazards are there or could there be? And also, are there invasive plants waiting underneath there for a little bit more sunlight, which here in the valley, we have pretty substantial problems with that everywhere. And where there's ash, it's going to be a pretty severe problem, I think. So options, again, monitoring, keeping track of this stuff, doing proactive work with invasive plant control. Maybe looking at, if you're in current use program and you can pull your plan out and look at your scheduling and understand the species composition, the different stands, and follow up, analyze it, so you know what you have and what you might lose. The choice of doing nothing is definitely a choice, but I think the choice of reviewing things and planning a little bit more and understanding what the risks are is the do something, which I think is a really valuable thing with any asset that you have. And so generally the state of Vermont, Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, and other bodies in the state are hoping that we can maintain ash as a component of our forest. It's a native species. There's 3 or 4 different ash species in the state that are all affected by EAB. White ash is the most common and the most economically valuable, but there's black ash, green ash, brown ash as well that are present in lower amounts. And so the idea is to know what you have in your forest land and respond, with careful thought, basically, just like you would with every other forest management problem or question that comes up. And so if you're in current use, you have to stick to your plan. And if you want to change something, you can amend your plan. And so you can work with your licensed consulting forester. You can talk directly to your county forester to understand what your options are and perhaps get feedback and some consultation from both of those entities, both state through the county forester or a forest protection forester or your consulting forester. And I would recommend doing that at, as soon as you can, and maybe at regular intervals, just so you're attentive to that sort of thing. If, I think that some of the people here might work for a town, and so this is complicated because we have street trees, a lot of street trees that are ash, and we have power lines and other issues that are more social issues. And so this is going to be something that some will face both on their forest land and also when they go to work. So that's something to give attention to if you fall into that category. With your municipal lands, I think it's, again, wise to keep more than one option on the table. And so you might want to be proactive, preemptive, and this is the slide says, and then also those other categories, making choices over time and then being reactive, as both of those are certainly going to happen. But I think the preemptive management, anticipating what could happen, is a really good idea. And if you're planting street trees, you might want to choose something other than ash at this moment in time. For municipalities, as I said, they're going to land in a bunch of different places. I know here in Middlebury, there's been a couple efforts with stem injection of different chemicals that are pushing back against the potential for EAB to come in. And then, of course, proactively planting species that don't include ash. So the question will be, what do you have? And whether it's your own land or on municipal land, I think that's a good place to start, understanding what you have. And then, of course, if you're in town government, there's some cost to all this. And so So understanding that, you can do that through your county forester or through tree services. You know, I have information from tree services about this sort of thing here in Addison County, and I just update it periodically. The Vermont Urban Community Forestry Program has guidance for municipalities that is available. And so if anyone needs that sort of information, I can provide that contact information. And then VT Invasives has a lot of really good information, both about the insect and about what this presentation is about, basically. So a whole lot of different information is available through vtinvasives.org. I guess that will round up. Maybe I'll just leave questions for the very end and let other people carry on with their part of the presentation, unless someone has something they want to ask right off. We good?
Yeah, so Chris, what I'll do is if you stop sharing your screen, and we'll let Paul pull his screen up, and Russ, you can comment anything that you like. I'll read you a couple questions until we're ready and I see Paul's presentation up.
Okay, I guess we can take a couple. I saw a couple questions pop up on the screen, which included something about female ash priority over male. I'm not sure there's a priority one way or the other. Someone questioned what would a target basal area be for thinning, removing the ash.
Yeah.
I guess normally ash is not that heavy. You know, normally it's just 6% of the forest, something like that. So normally if you've got ash in a stand, your basal area level is going to be, you can probably still get it to B level, down to sea level be the minimum at this point, unless otherwise, you know, you get permission to do that from county forester, or your consulting forester might recommend something like that in some cases.
All right, it looks like Paul's all set. So if you wanted to turn it over to Paul, Russ, that would be great.
You said, Paul?
I'm ready. Whenever.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks again. My name's Paul Frederick. I work for the Department of Forest and Parks, and I work primarily in wood utilization. Work a lot with the forest products industry and tracking markets. Some of the stuff that I'll go over will be a little bit of a repeat of what Chris had mentioned. Some of it's new stuff, so get started here. You know, obviously people realize that ash is a pretty important resource in the state. Just the number of people that are on this call may, you know, make that pretty obvious to me. But I just wanted to take a minute to put some monetary values on the resource, you know, put the monetary value of the resource into perspective a little bit. Vermont has roughly 1.7 billion board feet of ash saw timber on the land. That's about 10% of the standing saw timber volume in total in Vermont. And over 80% of that's on private land. So if you were to assume an average stumpage value of about $250,000 board feet, that saw timber is potentially worth $360 million to Vermont landowners. And that value has been pretty stable over the last few years. There's been some fluctuation up and down with price and demand, but for the most part, for the last few years, it's been a pretty stable price for ash stumpage. And ash is used in a pretty diverse set of different products. There are a number of domestic markets for everything from tool handles and baseball bats to furniture. But the total volume used in the US is actually a relatively small percentage of the total value of volume that's harvested. The real driving market for ash, lumber, and logs is in the export market, and China is the destination for most of the ash that goes overseas. A little bit goes to Vietnam, but far and away, China is our biggest export customer for ash. Chinese consumers really like open grain hardwoods and often prefer oak, but when oak prices get high, manufacturers start looking to ash as a less expensive substitute. It can pretty easily be stained to look like oak and does pretty well in the markets in the Far East. So as a result, ash markets are really much tied to trade policy and the strength or weakness of the Chinese economy. And we saw some significant changes over time with the trade war that we had going with China. There was a 15 to 20% tariff on our lumber and logs going to China, which really did affect the markets for a period of time. Those tariffs ended back around the first of the year, and even though COVID has had some impact on markets and demand, we have seen the ash markets come back. They're reasonably strong now, but that can certainly change pretty quickly. So what does happen to the value of ash logs when they're attacked by EAB? Lumber quality and value really starts to be impacted right away. The first defect that appears in declining trees is often stain. And ash doesn't form what's considered to be a true heartwood like some trees do, but it does have a discolored heart if there's been wounding in the upper portions of the tree. And that's what tends to happen with emerald ash borer infestations. The trees tend to develop large discolored hearts and blue stain that's oftentimes associated with the injury itself. The holes that the insects are making in the trees are making it possible for the bacteria that form blue stain to get into the tree. Some mills have also reported that the wood becomes brittle and loses its strength properties soon after it's been infested. Upper logs are apt to deteriorate before butt logs. Chris mentioned the infestations tend to start in the tops of the trees, and that's the area that's attacked first. The stain and the insect injury will continue to move down the stem as the infestation progresses. The attack typically isn't uniform around the tree either, so you'll find that some parts of the wood are going to be more affected by the defect than others. And then the photo on this slide of the slab of wood kind of shows some of the light blue stain that's probably a result of those insect emergence holes, as well as some of the brown stain that's occurring associated with that heart. Something else to be considered is the changes in strength of the wood once it's been infested with EAB. And again, Chris mentioned this. I talked to some of my counterparts in the mid-Atlantic and the Midwestern states that have had emerald ash borer for a period of time now, about how long ash logs were salvageable following an EAB infestation. And while their opinions were a little bit mixed, everyone that responded agreed that once the signs of infestation were visible, the clock was really ticking, and once they were dead, they were only valuable for firewood. If you think about dead ash trees, even without EAB present, the roots of those trees seem to rot fairly quickly, and the snags don't stand very long anyway. But when they're infested with or killed by EAB, they become brittle. The stems themselves actually snap unexpectedly. One of my friends is a forester in Maryland, called it ash snap. And it is very serious. It's very dangerous for loggers and folks removing trees. And logging crews in many of the areas where the folks that I talk to will only harvest infested ash from the safety of a mechanical harvester. So if you do harvest your ash, can you even move it to the markets? There's been Russ and Chris both mentioned the EAB quarantine. Since 2002, USDA's had an EAB quarantine in place to help slow the spread of the pest to areas that weren't infested. But in spite of the regulations, the pest has continued to spread and become established across pretty much the whole natural range of ash in the US and Canada. At this point, APHIS is changing their strategy to focus more on management of the pest. So they are dropping the federal quarantine as of tomorrow, surprisingly enough, ironically. And they're shifting the resources that they were using on regulatory action into more management techniques like biological control agents. States are still going to be able to restrict movements within their own quarantine areas, within their own borders. It appears that the only state in our area with plans for a state quarantine is going to be Maine, which still has only a fairly small area that's actually known to be infested with EAB. So moving ash into uninfested areas in Maine will require regulatory approval. But at this point, we don't have any details on exactly what that's going to look like in practice. From Vermont's standpoint, from the beginning, our strategy has been to take a voluntary approach to slowing the spread of EAB within the state. Basically, we've been asking landowners, foresters, loggers, sawmills, any timber buyers to adopt a set of practices designed to minimize the movement of the insect and to give everyone more time to react and deal with the management of this resource. The number of infested areas has certainly increased over the last few years. And frankly, the map, it does look a little depressing. That said, FPR and the Agency of Agriculture are planning to continue to recommend slow the spread practices because there really are a lot of healthy ash trees still out there to protect. It's important to remember when you look at the eggs on the map, the so-called, we call them fried eggs, I guess, and affectionately. They're actually 10-mile circles where insects might be present, but in most cases, the center point of of any one of those circles is maybe a single infested tree or a single insect in a trap. And nearly all of those circles, there are still a lot of uninfested trees growing and surviving. So I just wanted to touch base really quick on some of the slow the spread recommendations. Chris mentioned them. They're available on the VT Invasives website with some detail. We're in the process now of updating those slow the spread documents to reflect the fact that the federal quarantine is going away. Optimally, we like to suggest that people cut their ash in the winter months during the non-flight period, and that they utilize markets that treat both the products and the residues in accordance with our treatment options prior to the beginning of the flight season at the end of May. Chipping low-grade wood is a good option. Chipping essentially kills virtually all of the insects that are present. So that's a good way to handle low-grade wood that perhaps doesn't have any sawlog value or pulpwood value. And we're asking folks not to move untreated ash firewood outside of the infested areas, whether it be log length or cut and split wood. We found over time that firewood is really one of the ways that most of the insects seem to be transported from place to place. If you do have to cut during the flight period, again, we're asking folks if you can delay the harvest or delay moving the the ash material offsite until after the 1st of October. That's ideal. During the flight season, we're asking processors to treat the residues immediately. So that means when they're debarking logs, we'd like to see that bark ground into a finer mulch on a daily basis. And there are some mills that are able to do that and are utilizing ash from infested areas during the summer months. Again, chipping is a great option if you can do it. And again, don't move ash firewood outside of the infested zones. So I'll just finish up with the images of VT invasives. Again, the slow to spread documents are there and available. There's a lot of information on VT invasives about EAB. And it's really geared toward a variety of audiences. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and give it back to Russell.
Thank you, Paul. And I'll turn it right over to Rose Beatty, consulting forester in Northfield, Vermont. You've been a consultant for a number of years in Washington, Orange, maybe parts of Addison County. Be good to hear what she has to say in her relationship with her clients and what she's planning or might help them plan over the next 10 years or so. Rose?
All right, thanks. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So yes, as Russ said, I've been a consulting forester for about 30 years now. And I am doing exactly what Chris and Paul have said, to be quite honest, following slow the spread, trying to harvest. I'm in Northfield and most of my clients are in the high risk or infected area. So we are trying to harvest saw log size ash. I guess I'd like to make that point that I personally am not taking all ash out of the forest. I think it's important to leave some ash for the future. So I'm cutting saw log size ash mainly, and low unacceptable basal area or low quality, stems that definitely won't make it for saw logs. And again, I think the point was made and should be reiterated that you got to know where your ash are, how you're going to get them out, and the timing is so important. I think that's about what, and I do agree with the options that are out there. I've worked with people that are horse loggers. I've worked with conventional loggers, simply skidders and bulldozers, as well as some whole tree operators that, so I think the terrain, the property, and the landowner's objectives all have to be taken into account for which type of operation should be used. But you got to know where the ash are, how much, is it worth it to hire a logger to come in? So you probably will have to include other areas if you don't have a lot of ash. But while they are doing the thing, and you certainly, my recommendation is, as they've said, you should cut the saw log, gain the value, and not lose it. So I think that's about, anything else? I think that's about what I have.
Okay, thanks, Rose. Lisa, have you got like a list of questions or something?
Yeah, we do have a few questions that are in there. And I also just put into the chat box a link to a publication that is online that Vermont Coverts worked with the Forest Guild and with Tony D'Amato from UVM, VWA, and a couple others on 10 recommendations for managing ash in your woods. It's a great publication. You can find it on our website or follow the link that I typed in the chat box. So one of the questions that I thought was interesting, Len wanted to know, so if the larvae live in the bark for 2 to 3 years and then you see the exit holes, you're at least 2 to 3 years into an infestation. So how long into an infestation would one start to see that woodpecker flecking on the trees, before or after that initial escape? That's for any one of you.
We need an entomologist.
I think it's going to be before they escape because it's going to be the larva that they're feeding on under the bark. So, and it'll, you know, after the initial attack, you're going to have reinfestation. The whole tree isn't going to be infested in year one. It tends to start in the top, and the population of insects in the tree increases over time. So I guess anytime after the first year, it's possible, but I think it becomes more prevalent as time goes on and there's more larvae in the tree.
Great, thanks, Paul. There was some questions about, you know, female and male ashes. And I think some people may need some clarification on that. Some people understand that they're a dioecious, so there's male and female trees. So we need to really be thinking about managing both of those in order to be seeing these on into the future. And what ratio do we need to be thinking about female trees to male trees in an area? Is that a thought process at all?
So I can just say I was on a webinar where I believe the person from UVM thought that it's split about 50-50. So your odds are pretty good. You know, if you're doing a general thinning, you're probably going to leave some female and male.
Great, thanks. Paul, someone was asking with the retail markability is affected by the staining. Does that affect the firewood properties of the ash?
No, I think as far as its you know, its value as firewood, it's probably just fine. You know, it does, you know, as we all said, I guess it does become more brittle, but that doesn't seem to affect its ability to be burned. And as Chris said, I know from experience that you can cut ash in the wintertime and it burns very well. Green.
So there was a question, do we know if ash seeds are being saved someplace, you know, for the future, if we're you know, if we're very concerned about ash?
I don't know, Rose, I don't know if you're trying to put up your hand or not, but
I don't know. What I was going to say was I don't know about that.
Oh, I know there was some activity several years ago with collection of ash seed. I think it's been done across the range of ash. So there has been some efforts to save the genetic material. I'm not sure who actually is heading that up or where that material is stored, but I know some of our folks were involved in seed collection a few years ago.
Great. Can one or all of you talk about basically what the idea behind lingering ash is and why it's important to keep ash as a component of our forests?
Okay, I'll start. This is, you know, obviously personal opinion. It's a beautiful tree. You know, aesthetically, value has been consistent. You know, we get good value out of it, and diversity. You know, we don't want a whole sugar maple stand. We really want the diversity. It grows up first in open areas. So if you go in and you do a thinning and create these small openings, you know, maybe ash will seed in, grow up tall, and reproduce.
Chris, Paul, anything to add?
I guess the only thing I would add is that, you know, anytime we lose a species, I think we lose a lot more than what we ever realize. And, you know, for any species to become extinct is a terrible waste. That said, I think, you know, what's being seen in the Midwest is that seedlings will regenerate. And there's some hope that with the biological control agents, once we get through the the I guess once we lose some of the larger trees and the ability for those larger trees to produce thousands and thousands of emerald ash borer adults, it will be a lot more possible for the biological control agents, the other insects that are feeding on emerald ash borer to help keep that population in check. And you know, there's always some possibility. You know, Lisa, you mentioned the lingering ash. There's some possibility that genetics may play a role, and there may be some enough genetic diversity in the species so that it does have some resist. You know, some of them may have some resistance to the insect itself. So.
Great. Chris, did you want to add anything?
I think that, I mean, what people have said is, you know, rounds out what I would have commented about as well. I mean, I think that understanding that there's lingering ash, just like there's lingering elm. So elm individuals are, you know, resistant. It's been shown, proven. They've been bred, and I think similar things will happen with ash. There'll be individuals that prove to be resistant or unaffected. And so what it, I think, means is from a landowner's perspective or a homeowner's perspective is, again, evaluating risk, evaluating and understanding opportunity, and making decisions from, you know, good information, basically. And so everybody who's listening today is already making that effort to get information. Whether it's good or not, they'll be able to decide on their own. But I think that the key is knowing what you have, knowing that you have some risk if you have ash as a landowner. And then deciding how you want to navigate that risk and manage that risk. And again, if you have opportunity to capture value, you know, whether it's with ash or another species because a neighbor's working on their property or something like that, I think it's wise to give those opportunities and situations careful consideration. And this is adding another facet to that sort of evaluation. And it's, you know, it's too bad that this is what it is rather than like really strong market conditions or something that would make you be considering this sort of thing. But so in a certain way, I think, you know, the situation isn't changed. And so forest landowners and homeowners have to make, you know, decisions all the time about their properties. And this is a conversation today, and it's, you know, really important to understand what you have and evaluate what you have, and then respond when you're able. And you have the energy and opportunity. I'll stop.
All right, I'll add, you know, ash are really important to Northeast culture and heritage. It's used for basket making by indigenous people, the black ash. So there's that aspect to it too. And it's also important for wildlife, a wildlife species tree, and as many are. So keeping this as part of the forest is really important. And to think about, like you said, what you have and how you're managing it. I'm going to read this one. Paul, I think it's more for you the way I read it. It's from Jazz. And has there been a large increase in production in Midwestern states due to their infestations? If so, why has the price remained relatively stable? In other words, is there a typical supply and demand scenario with ash?
Well, I'll try that one. What I've heard from folks at Ames True Temper, which is a company in Wallingford that makes handles, basically tool handles basically, and has a number of plants across the Midwest and Northeast. And what they saw in Ohio was that initially, when they first started to get infestations and landowners were reacting by cutting heavy on their ash, they did see a reduction in the price of stumpage and logs as a result of that flush of wood that came on the market. But as time went on, it became clear that all once the easy wood was cut, then the supply kind of tapered off and the price came back to some extent. Really, where we're at with the market right now, it really, there probably is a supply and demand relationship going on. The Chinese buyers are the ones that control it pretty well. They are, it's hard to say that they work in concert with one another, but they all seem to know what each other's doing, and they have a pretty good effect of being able to push price down when they need to. I don't know if that answers your question, Jazz, but it's fairly complicated. It's certainly not a simple supply and demand scenario.
So Steve has a question. At what point do ash start producing viable seed? How old are they about? And does EAB feed on them before they reach that maturity?
I'll just light in here quick. They start to seed at a relatively young age. They're 20, 25 feet. You'll see ash with seed on them. But the insect will, when it's heavy and all the larger, most of the larger trees are gone, they'll feed on ash down to 1 inch diameter and kill them. So.
Okay. Len was a little more clear on his question. He wants to know, if we harvest ash ahead of an infestation, how much ash should we leave as a percent of the total basal area of all the species? Like, how much should we leave? Or maybe Rose, what are you doing with your landowners, when you're harvesting those saw logs, what are you leaving so that we still have ash as a component of our forest?
Well, as I say, I am harvesting, it's almost a diameter limit, I would hate to lose a 16-inch beautiful saw log. So I'm harvesting ash, some 14s, but most of the 16-inch stems and greener. So you're leaving behind, the majority of the smaller trees.
And once cut, how long will ash last on the landing before it's no longer useful even as firewood?
I'll answer that with a saying that my grandfather used to use related to fence posts, and he said his uncle told him one time that ash would rot in a dew, so it doesn't last very long if you leave it uncovered and unsplit. I think if you get it out. Get it up off the ground and get it covered, it's probably will last just as well as anything else, but it's not terribly rot resistant. And I think that's probably why we see it tipping over a lot in the woods when they're dead, even without EAB in the mix.
Great. I'm not sure these last couple questions have the answers from you guys, but I'll throw them out there anyway. Jeremy was pointing out, kind of related to that ash snap idea, that you shouldn't even climb ash after 1 year, like the arborists are saying. And he was wondering if Green Mountain Power and the co-op are doing anything to be preemptive.
I'm pretty sure they are, because I think they're charging members an additional fee now just for ash removal along the power lines. I'm not sure the percentage is, but I know Green Mountain Power is doing that, and I think Washington Electric Co-op does that.
Okay. The other question was from Rich, and he heard that there is a relationship with certain mushrooms. He says morels with a question mark and ash trees. Is there a more profound impact beyond the ash tree? Yeah, I didn't think we'd have an answer for that one.
Say that one more time. Can you say that again, Lisa?
Sure, he just, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but he heard that there's a relationship with certain mushrooms and ash trees, and he's wondering if we lose the ash, I think, is there a more profound impact beyond that?
Yeah, I think that we don't know the impacts of losing an individual species totally. I mean, I think it would be impossible that it wouldn't impact other species. Whether it mean they would disappear too, I don't know, but it will certainly impact other species. Probably impact buckthorn the most here in the valley.
Okay. Well, that about does it for the questions that I'm seeing, but I know these presenters would be happy to answer anyone's questions. I'm happy to provide emails if you need them, let me know. I'll put them in the email because I will send an email out with the recording of this presentation. And I do encourage you to go to www.vtinvases, go to communityforestry.org, or go to the Coverts website, and under our resources, you can find the link to the 10 things you can do for management of ash on your property. These are all wonderful resources. Talk to your consulting foresters, let them know you care about ash, and so that it's very important that we do keep this tree as part of our community of our forests as we move forward through this. Russ, any last minute words?
I just once again thank the speakers, the attendees tonight, and thank you, Lisa, Vermont Coverts. And hopefully, between the discussion and speakers we had tonight, it'll help some of the landowners make some important decisions that they're going to have to make over the next 10 years, probably. And with that, I guess good night.
Good night, all. Thanks for joining us.
Good job, everybody.
Good night. Thanks, guys.
Good night.
See you all.